So we're gonna show you how to set up your vermicomposting bin. So this is your worm habitat for your composting worms in your classroom. You need a few supplies. They will be provided to you from your Little Green Thumbs coordinator. There's a few things you'll need to find around your school. You will need a drill. You'll need a bit about a ½ inch. You can get away with a 3/8 inch as well. You'll also need some newspaper. This will be used for the bedding of your worm bin. You'll also need water to moisten your worm bin, and you'll want to gather some food for your worms. So just some veggies, eggshells. You can watch the next video for a little bit more information about what to feed your worms. You should have also had with your kit a Rubbermaid container. This will be the actual habitat for your worm bin. You'll also need a cup or two of potting soil that comes with your garden kit, and of course, your worms. These will be packaged in all different ways. So they might come like this in a milk jug container. They might come in a box. They might come in a bag. So you'll have about a ½ pound to a pound of worms to start your worm bin. So the first step of setting up your worm bin is drilling holes into your worm bin container. So that's your Rubbermaid container. That's because worms, just like people, have a few essential needs. They need air to survive. So by punching some holes into our worm bin, that's just letting air into the container. Your worms will not try to escape their worm bin into the sterile environment of a classroom. If your worm bin is healthy, this is the perfect environment for a worm to live. It will not try to escape unless something is really wrong with your bin. So don't worry about having the holes. Your worms are not going to come out. Really simple. You want to drill holes in the top layer of the bottom of your bin. You can also drill holes in the top of your bin, but you just want to be careful because if you ever set anything on top of your bin, you don't want to cover up those holes. So the best way to avoid that is to actually drill your holes all along the top of your Rubbermaid container. You want to put about 6 or 7 holes on either of the long sides and about 3 or 4 holes on either side. Really simple. It should be simple to do with your drill. You just want to drill the holes in your Rubbermaid container, first step. Once you've drilled your holes in your Rubbermaid container, the second step is to rip your newspaper to act as bedding for the worms. So newspaper is absolutely great for the worms. It's non-toxic. Newspapers in Canada and the United States are all printed with vegetable ink, so they're totally safe for your worms. And they provide a nice bedding. They make sure and troubleshoot the bin so that it's not too wet and not too dry. The worms can also eat the newspaper. So if there ever is a long stretch, you forget about your worms, they can always eat the newspaper. They will eat the newspaper, and it provides a little bit of grit for their stomach and helps break up some of the food that they're eating. To rip your newspaper, there is a grain in your newspaper and it will be lengthwise. Great activity for kids. Just rip your newspaper into strips. Once you've ripped your newspaper up, you want to give it a bit of a scrunch to give it some volume and to create some air. You want to have about 3 or 4 inches of newspaper in your bin. And now you want to moisten your bedding. You can simply do that in the bin itself. Just add probably about a cup of water, but add it as you go. Scrunch up your bedding. You want the moisture level to be about the moisture of a wrung out sponge. So you don't want it dripping wet. If you squeeze your bedding and you see water come out, that means it's too wet. If you add too much water, just add more bedding. If you add too much bedding, just add more water. So once you have your bedding about the moisture level of a wrung out sponge, you want to add your soil. Now your soil functions in a few different ways. Your soil will also create some grit for the worms when they're eating. So they will eat some of the organic matter in your soil, and it will provide a little bit of grit in their tummies to actually break it down. So worms do not have teeth. teeth. They're actually just sucking the food after the bacteria has started to break it down in your bin. So just add that in. You just want to create like a coating over top of the bedding. So now you have added your bedding, you've added your soil, now it's time to add your worms. You simply want to create a corner, moving the bedding out of the way. Add in your worms and cover them up with a layer, probably about a 1-inch layer of your bedding. So if your worms have been fed in the last little while, you can simply now just leave your worms for about a week, let them get acclimatized to the bin. Make sure that you put the lid back on the bin. Worms do not like light, so they will move away from the light. If you need to feed your worms now, then you simply want to, again, move some of the bedding out of the way in one of the corners of your bin. Add your food. It's best you can chop it up, or if it's food that's been left for a little while, add about 1 liter of food. Yogurt containers are a great place to store your food before you add them. And now simply cover up the food with the bedding. You always want to make sure that any food you add to your bin is fully covered up with the bedding. So that's what can lead to smells and then can lead to issues, is leaving that food exposed. So just make sure that it's fully covered up. There you have it. You have a very healthy bin of worms, very happy bin of worms. You can just put the lid on, store it somewhere that the temperature is going to stay pretty even. Worms love just a room temperature spot. And you also want to leave it somewhere that there's not going to be people walking by constantly. So any of the vibrations, if you're putting it on the floor, somewhere out of the way. Next time you feed them, think about a week, you can always just pull back the bedding, see how far they've got on the food that you've added, and you're ready to go. That's the start of your vermicomposting adventure.